I want you to go back with me in the story I want to now tell you. I want you to go back with me 2,600 years. Go back 2,000 years to the birth of Jesus, that time. Now go 600 years earlier than that. And you're certainly earlier than the Greeks. You're certainly earlier than Alexander the Great. Obviously, you're much earlier than the Roman Empire. And I want you to go all the way back to the city of Jerusalem. Now, you may not have been there, and you would not have wanted to have been there at the time I'm talking about. It is a horrible time in the history of the people of God. You almost can't even call them the people of God. First of all, it is a time of moral bankruptcy. It is a time of murder, robbery, thievery, deceit, lying, family breakdown. Religion, yes, but it has just become organized hypocrisy. The people would go into the place of worship in Jerusalem, and they would go through their little rituals of whatever they would say to Jehovah God, and then they would go home and lie to each other and murder their neighbor, literally kill them. They would steal from one another. It was a horrible time of moral bankruptcy. And at this moment, God calls a man to take His word to the people of Judah. There is no more colorful figure emerging from the pages of the New Testament than the man He called. Actually, He didn't call him as a man. He called him as a young boy. And when He called this young man would later use some of the most bizarre methods to preach and to teach the people of Judah. I like to think of them as the first PowerPoint presentations. He took a boiling pot of water, filled it up, boiled it, and then poured it out. And God said that's exactly what the Chaldeans are going to do to the Jewish people. He took a linen belt and hid it in the rocks to prove its uselessness, and said that's how useless the people of God have become upon the earth. He told him to cut his hair. He told him to dig a pit and get down into the pit and stay there. He told him to take a vineyard and to show that God is going to come through and take all of the people away, just like you take the grapes away. He told him to weep, and he became known as the weeping prophet. He told him to go out and stand between two roads and say, just as there are crossroads, my people now stand at the crossroads of history. Wineskins, a piece of pottery. He told him to go down to the potter's house, and he says, as the potter makes the vessel, so I make the people of God. His name, many of you have already guessed his name, was Jeremiah, the weeping prophet. How many times did the people try to kill him? How many conspiracies were there against his life? How many assassination attempts were there against Jeremiah? And according to tradition, they finally killed him. They took him out one day and took some stones and beat him to death with the stones. Only God really knows the suffering and the loneliness and the confusion of a man like Jeremiah, because throughout his life, even though he was constantly running in to resistance, he continued to preach and to teach. He was aware that the hand of God was upon his life. What is the secret to this man's life? That's what I want to ask. What is it that makes this man tick? Anybody who preaches gets discouraged. I've noticed that among my own peer group, most of the guys have now quit. There's enough out there in any situation to cause a guy to quit. But let me tell you what, I'm blessed compared to Jeremiah. I am deeply, deeply blessed compared to this man. I wouldn't even stand in his shadow. What is there about this man that causes him to get up when he's been knocked down so many times? The secret to this man's life is what we call the call of God. Now that is a wonderful expression, the call of God. It's a Bible expression. The fact of the matter is that it's often been abused. How many people just say, the reason I did this is that God called me to do it, whatever it may be. God called me to buy this new car. God called me to do here. God called me to go buy this and sell that and so forth. And so people have abused it. But the fact that it's been abused doesn't mean that it is not true. There is the hand of God working and calling. And Bob and I are going to be saying this morning that that hand of God not only rested on Jeremiah, but it rests on you. Here is his call from Jeremiah 1, 5 through 8. God says, "Before I shaped you in the womb, I knew all about you. Before you saw the light of day, I had holy plans for you. A prophet to the nations, that's what I had in mind for you." Jeremiah said, "Look at me. I don't know anything. I'm only a boy." But God said, "Don't say I'm only a boy. I'll tell you what to say, and I'll be right there looking after you." And the call goes on, in which God says, "And I will put my words into your mouth." This is a holy and sacred moment. And God is revealing to us another instance in which He lays His hand on one of His men or women and He calls them. 2 weeks ago, we looked at Moses. A week ago, we looked at Peter. Today, we're looking at Jeremiah. It's all over the Bible. The call of God. And if you'll open up your bulletin now, right now, to the insert pages, I want to go over real quickly the elements of the call of God, using Jeremiah as our example. Now notice first that God identifies the person. That as He identified Jeremiah, we're saying He's identified you. And He's identified me. And before you were born, He had holy plans for you. A plan for your life. And you were set apart uniquely for that plan. I love Batso Barrett Baxter's title for his autobiography, "Every Life a Plan of God." Why don't you write that title down? Every life a plan of God. I have holy plans for you. And he looks across this church, and he looks at every teenager, and he looks at every young person, and he says, "I have a plan for you." The second thing that then God does in the call is that He reveals who He is. He doesn't ask you to sign up for anything. He doesn't hand you a card and a pencil and say, "I want you to sign up." He tells you who He is. He reveals Himself to you. Somebody says, "Well, how does He do that?" I don't know all the ways. There must be 1,000 ways. Here are a few: by answering prayer. Some of you had mothers that prayed over you. Some of you had daddies that prayed over you. And God answered their prayer for your life. Some of you had coaches that prayed over you. Some of you had professors that prayed over you. Some of you had teachers that prayed over you. And God answered their prayers that you would become a Christian and you would respond to God's call for your life. By His Word, certainly He calls. That's why we urge you to be in it. God works through other people as the Holy Spirit lays upon them the things to say to you. I never will forget Brother McDonough, the oldest elder of the Hillsborough Church in Nashville, coming to me when I was about 12 years old. And Brother Mac just put his arm around me, that old white-headed gentleman, and he said, "Have you ever thought about the possibility of devoting your life to preaching?" God, I think, spoke through Brother Mac. God speaks through other people to you and to me. He combines circumstances in our lives. What Batzel Barrett used to call the combination of circumstances. He combines them uniquely, and it becomes obvious to you. God's in this. God's working in this. God's combined some things in order to show you who He is, His personal love for you. And then, just like Jeremiah, we all feel inadequate. What did Jeremiah say? I'm just a what? What did he say? I'm just a boy. I'm just a boy. I can't do this. And what did God say to him? Don't say you're just a boy. I've got holy plans for you. What did Moses say? I never took a course in public speaking, God. I'm not eloquent. I don't know what rhetoric is. And God says, I've got a good speaker for you, your brother. His name's Aaron. He majored in speech. And he'll go for you. We all feel inadequate in the presence of the holy. Write that down. We all feel inadequate in the presence of the holy. We feel like we can't do it. We don't have the talent. We feel small compared to God's plan for us. I'm just a boy. I'm just a young person. I'm just one. What can one person do? What can a girl do? What can a guy do? We all feel real inadequate. So what does God do? He reassures us as to who He is. He lets us know that He has holy plans for us. And then we're able to accept His call. We accept it. The Bible calls it obedience. Obedience overcomes obstacles. Please write that down. Please put that on your heart. Obedience overcomes obstacles. People are going to discourage you. Somebody says, I want to go to the mission field in Ghana. And somebody says, you can't do that. You're not a preacher. You're not a missionary. You're too young. You can't speak. You don't know the Bible well enough. They'll give you 100 obstacles as to why you can't do what God has called you to do. God's called you to His holy plans, and He's looking for you to ask Him, James 1:5, for wisdom. For wisdom, so that you may obey Him. Obedience overcomes obstacles. Now, everybody needs to know that this is going to be hard. This is not easy to accept the plan of God for your life and the call of God, because they're going to be constant enemies. And Bob's going to share with us what those enemies are. Listen really carefully to this.
Yes, it's one thing to know the elements of the call, but we really need to know more. We need to know more because every time that God calls us, every time the Holy Spirit prompts us, Satan will step forward to stop us. Every time. Remember when Jesus answered the call of God? He was really popular at the first. He was a favorite with the crowds up in the north, and He could have stayed there. He could have stayed in Galilee, in the north, where he was the favorite, away from Jerusalem, away from all the religious controversy down in the south. But what did he do? He answered the call of God. And he went down and he found John the Baptist and he submitted to baptism, John's baptism. He made the decision to go to the cross. And then do you remember what happened? Immediately two things happened. God affirmed him and Satan attacked him. Immediately. So yes, we need to know more. This past week when Prentice and I were thinking through this message, we knew that we needed to think about the elements of the call, but we also knew that we needed to think about, number two, the enemies of the call. Now, when we're honest with ourselves, when we really want to see what it is that keeps God's call hidden from us, there is one very modern, very North American reality, and it obscures God's call every time. It pulls us away. It gives us another agenda. It tells us there's something else to go do. In fact, it even sounds good because it uses words like productivity, goal-oriented, high achievement. It's a master with all of those terms. But what it really is, down deep, is driven, obsessed, compulsive, inflexible, unbending. It's written all over corporate America. Dr. Herbert Freudenberger, the co-author of the book Burnout, How to Beat the High Cost of High Achievement, calls it superachievement syndrome and superachievement sickness. Dr. Joel Elks of the University of Louisville said, and I quote, "Our mode of life itself, the way we live, is emerging as today's principal cause of illness." The way we live is making us sick, is what he means. I once saw an article entitled, "We Are Driven," which was once the slogan of a major auto manufacturer, but he wasn't describing driving a truck. He was describing driving a life, a driven life. What does it mean to be driven? Why is it such an enemy of the called life? Gordon MacDonald is a man who struggled with the driven life, and in his book, Ordering Your Private World, he describes very eloquently the driven life. And I found myself highlighting almost every line of the book. Here's some of what he said. Write these things down. Driven people are preoccupied by accomplishment. Called people have a clear sense of purpose. Here's what we mean. Driven people can only feel good when they accumulate accomplishments. You could call it a psychology of achievement, and it can literally capture a person's heart. How? Well, accomplishment brings good feelings. Accomplishment brings praise from other people, and we all like that. And so there's this drive to accumulate more accomplishments. Have more to hang on the wall, more praise from people, more pats on the back. And we tend to begin to see life only in terms of results. Arrival is everything, and soon the trip means nothing. Secondly, driven people are caught in the pursuit of expansion. Called people have a growing sense of peace and joy. You see, driven people want to be a part of something bigger, something more successful. They're never satisfied with where they are. They want to be on the move. And so they're usually not pleased with the progress around them. They're usually not pleased with any of the people around them. Nobody ever measures up. Nobody is ever doing enough. And they're usually uneasy. They're usually restless. They're usually very impatient people. Driven people are caught in this pursuit, uncontrolled pursuit of expansion. Thirdly, driven people begin to lose their regard for integrity. Called people remember who they are. Driven people, what we mean is, are overly concerned with their own notoriety. They want to make sure that they always look good, everybody. They want to make sure that they're in the front of every picture. They want to be connected with the greats of the world. And they're so preoccupied with success and with achievement that there is this gap that begins to develop between their life and their values. Now they're saying, here are my values. They started off with, here are my values. But they're wanting this life so badly that they'll do anything to get it. And so there's this gap that develops. And they begin to look for shortcuts to success. And there's no time anymore to nurture their morals and to nurture their values. They lose the regard for integrity. Driven people also, as you can imagine, begin to lose relationships. Called people have a solid commitment to their relationships. What happens is projects become more important than people. In fact, sometimes people become obstacles to getting my projects done. You know, I could get more done if it just weren't for all these people. And so often there's this trail of bodies in the wake of this driven person. Colleagues, friends, a marriage. They all drop away. Exhausted, depleted, used, exploited, disillusioned. They walk as long as they can. They take it as long as they can. And then they fall away. And the driven person is just too busy for marriage, even though they're married. They're too busy for family, even though they have children. They're just too busy for friends, even though they really need them. And they're too busy, sadly, for God, even though they wear His name. Now, there's a man in the Old Testament who personifies the driven person. He's the first king of Israel, the son of Kish. His name is Saul. In 1 Samuel chapter 8, the people of Israel demand to have a king so they can be like all the other nations of the earth. And when Samuel takes this in prayer to God, here's what God tells him. God said, "It is not you they have rejected, but they have rejected me as their king. Now listen to them, but warn them solemnly and let them know what the king who will reign over them will do." And then he gives them an advanced picture of what life under King Saul will be like. Listen to this litany of phrases. Verse 11, he will take. Verse 13, he will take. Verse 14, he will take. Verse 15, he will take. Verse 17, guess what? He will take. Verse 18, you will cry out. That's what life under a driven king will be like. The first king of Israel was a driven man. In the next chapter, 1 Samuel 9, we learn that Saul, the first king, had 3 unearned characteristics. And they could have been strengths or weaknesses. He was wealthy, he was attractive, and he was very physically powerful. He was a head taller than most anyone else. He didn't earn any of those. He was given all of them. And these characteristics commanded attention. People saw him in a crowd. They gave him some quick advantages. In fact, when he became king, he found immediate success. And it blinded him to all of his weaknesses. He didn't cultivate his relationship to God. He didn't take responsibility for his people. And the signs of a busy, driven man began to appear. Once when he was faced with a battle, he got tired of waiting on the prophet Samuel to come and offer the necessary sacrifices. He became irritable. He became impatient. I mean, he had things to do. He had places to go. He couldn't wait on God, so he did it all himself and was chastised for it. In chapter 13, verse 14, finally Samuel said to Saul, "Your kingdom will not endure. The Lord has sought out a man after His own heart." And I thought of what would that translate into today at the end of someone's life. All the success you're pursuing is not worth it. You lost your family. You lost yourself. You lost your health. You lost your faith. You lost it. Because you were pursuing the wrong thing. A driven man. Saul was driven. Jeremiah was called. And I think the contrast between them is seen more clearly when they are under attack. Because when Saul had the risk of losing his kingdom, he reacted violently. He lashed out. He tried to protect his position. But Jeremiah, the called man, was so very, very different. Driven or called. Every day, we are faced with the decision, how are we going to live? My world tells me to live by my achievement, to be driven, to hold on, to dominate. But this morning, we're hoping that we will all see that if we are quiet long enough, we'll see some lessons of being called. Prentice, come tell us those lessons.
Jeremiah was called. Saul was driven. What about us? Let's end this with looking at some take-homes, some lessons for us. It is really, really tempting in church work to assign people to do things. I go over here and I say, Marilyn, this is what we need to happen. We don't have anybody to usher. We don't have anybody to welcome people. Would you and Suzanne and Todd and would John, would you all welcome people? It is so tempting in church work to assign people to do things. That's why this first lesson is so crucial. What we're talking about, what the Bible is describing, is not recruiting people. But instead of recruiting, it's all about calling. It's not waiting for the elders to ask you to do something. It's asking you to get down on your knees day by day and pray to God. Get in His Word, be still, and know that He's God. He will call you. He'll answer your prayer. He'll arrange the circumstances. He'll speak through somebody. He will tell you, I want this to happen in your life. I want you to begin to do this, this, and this. And it'll be real easy. It's a lot easier for the elders to get together and start saying, what we need are more song leaders, and we need this, and we need that, and we need teachers, and we need ushers. We need people to park cars, and we need preachers, and so we're going to assign you, and you. And what happens is that people that have no talent for that get assigned to do it. People that have no passion or interest in it get assigned to do it. This is not about guilty work. It is about joyful service. It is about being filled with joy because you know in your heart you're doing what God has asked you to do. It isn't about signing up. It's about worship and awe. You're going to hear me say it again. I've been saying it every Sunday this year. It is about Bible reading and prayer. And it is real easy for you to sit there and say, well, easy for you to say that. You're the preacher. Or, it can't be that simple. It is that simple. It's reading the book of Psalms. It's reading the life of Jesus. It's reading the book of Jeremiah. This is about awe. This is about you and God. This isn't about a committee. This isn't about the deacons calling you up and saying, we got to have this work done. Can you count the money? Can you turn on the lights? Can you vacuum the carpet? That's not what it is. It's about you and God. And God says, I have holy plans for you. Those are His plans as He calls them in your life. It is not selfish, brothers and sisters, for you to use your gifts and your talents and to follow your passion. Maybe your passion is sports. Maybe your passion is computers. Maybe everybody in high school thinks you're a nerd. But God has holy plans for you. God wants to use every boy and every girl and every man and woman to follow their passion. In preparing for this message, I thought about Pat and Danny and George and Dick. These are guys that used to play basketball in my backyard. My dad went over to the classification center in Nashville and bought a basketball goal and built a backboard and put it up exactly 10 feet high, put a brand new net on it, and it was the best thing in the neighborhood for basketball. And all the guys would come to my backyard, and you know what we'd do? Do the same thing you did. We'd get two guys be captains and choose up sides. I'll take Pat because he's the tallest. And I'll take Danny because he knows how to dribble. Who do you want? And blue, we'd go back and forth. And we'd choose up sides, and then we'd play basketball. In backyard basketball, every play is a desperate attempt to find out what works. You don't have a coach. You don't call plays. Not in backyard basketball. It's one-on-one stuff. Nearly. It's not quite that because you got more than another guy against you. But you don't set screens and look for the open man. It just, whatever works. That's what you do. And if it works once, you do it again and again and again until somebody stops it. It's a desperate attempt to find out what works. And I have found over the years that that's the way many Christians live their lives. I know a lot of Christians that are living their lives like backyard basketball. A desperate attempt to find out what works. What church works, what service works, what style of music works, what kind of prayer works, what preaching works, what guy I like, what books I read, what's going to work. And they're in desperate straits trying to find out what works. Then my mind went to organized basketball and the first team I played on. We had a coach, a gym. We had plays. Guess who called the plays? He did. He would show us how to set a screen, how for a guy to run by you on a screen, how to then pivot so that you're open, how that he could then bounce the ball to you or throw it to you with a two-handed chest pass. He is teaching you the plays that he has for his offense. Now, my illustration lacks a lot. I understand that. It's like any illustration that you're comparing to illustrate God. But God's more like a coach with an organized team than He is backyard basketball. He's got a set of plays in mind. He wants you on His team. He chooses you to be on His team. He calls you. He then tells you the plays He wants you to run. I want Laren to set the screen. I want Chris to come off with the ball. I want DG to pass the ball to Laren. Da-da, 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 and here we go. Providence is God's way of calling the plays for your life. Where we get in trouble is we think we're calling the plays. And we've got a coach. And all I'm trying to get you to do at the end of this message is realize you have talent and ability and opportunity and health right now. And every boy sitting right there and every girl sitting right there, every child listening to me, God has holy plans for your life. He's your coach. You're on His team when He calls you. And He says, don't say you're a boy. Don't say you're just a girl. I have holy plans for your life. Isn't that powerful? He wants you to listen to Him. and His calling of the plays for your life. And so let 2007 be a time in which you do more work out of joy, out of worship, that you try to do some things that you've always wanted to do and felt inclined to do. You don't wait for an assignment. You don't wait for a deacon or an elder to call you. You don't get a call from the preacher or whoever. You hear God. And God says, I've got holy plans for you. I call you to be on my team. Here's the play. Go run it.